It honestly feels surreal to be living in a world with a new Superman movie coming out. It's been 11 years since Man of Steel, which is crazy. It's odd to have that long of a wait for a new Superman project to release, but then again, fans waited nearly 2 decades between the quest for peace and Superman Returns.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
As a kid, Superman meant the world to me. He was in many ways my and many's comfort hero. Since his first appearance, he has stood as that helpful, loving friend always there to lend a hand, and with a smile. He represented what the perfect symbol of America should be, regardless of politics, which is ironic because co-creator Joe Shuster was Canadian.
Strong, but by day he's a mild-mannered reporter. Glasses, a secret identity.
Honestly, you Canadian kids.
However, since then, he has grown to become a global icon and a superhero whose jurisdiction extends to the entire planet. James Gunn's upcoming reboot presents an opportunity to bring Superman back to his roots and portray him in a more traditional way.
Who are you?
A friend.
What's the S stand for?
On my world, it needs hope.
While Superman would first come to life on television with George Reeves in the 50s, a version made for the big screen wouldn't even be thought of until 1973, when producer Ilya Salkind purchased the film rights from DC for a tiny $3 million. DC truly underestimated the value of their most well-known character. Richard Donner and Christopher Reeve would bring Kal-El to life for the very first time in 1978. Everyone was enticed by the iconic tagline, "You'll believe a man can fly." Upon seeing it, the world truly did. Christopher Reeve's portrayal instantly touched the hearts of millions. His genuine charm and kindness embodied Superman to a T.
You really shouldn't smoke, Miss Lane.
Don't tell me lung cancer, right?
Well, not yet, thank goodness.
Oh, Rosie, I love this boy.
The slight differences he put on how he portrayed Clark Kent went all the way down to mannerisms, but more than just that, even his posture too. Playing the character again in 3 sequels, which the latter 2 weren't very well received,
Sis?
it was near impossible to see anyone else take on the role, though Tim Burton came very close to making his own version of Superman with Nicolas Cage as the famed hero. Tensions rose with producer John Peters.
Number one, I don't want to see him fly. I said, okay. I hate all that flying shit, so I don't want to see him fly. Number two, I don't want to see him in that suit.
We were doing tests, we were doing all this stuff, but it just was crazy. I mean, the producers, I had one meeting where we were looking at the suit.
I was like, the Superman suit with the cape and the blue and the red and the yellow? He goes, yeah, I don't like it. His words, not mine. Too faggy.
And the studio and the producer were going, we don't want the suit, we're afraid of the red. They wanted to have him in Michael Jordan shorts.
No, that's true.
Pure fiction. This one was invented by a writer.
Of course he has to fly. He always flew. Superman, you talking about?
Why the fuck you lying?
I don't even understand.
It's a total fabrication.
Which unfortunately led to Tim Burton and Cage's exit from the production, shutting down the project entirely. Through Burton's involvement, Michael Keaton was also set to return as Batman. Photos of Cage in costume do exist, and well, he looks kind of funny. The original dark suit is not great, but the final one looks pretty awesome. And while it's unfortunate the film never saw the light of day, Nick Cage would finally play the Man of Steel in The Flash, though much of his performance was scrapped in favor of CGI.
I was on set for maybe 3 hours. When I went to the picture, it was me fighting a giant spider. I did not do that.
With only one brief shot of him actually appearing de-aged.
It's out of my control. I literally went to shoot a scene for maybe an hour in the suit looking at the destruction of a universe and trying to convey the feelings of loss and sadness and terror in my eyes. That's all I did.
In 2002, Warner Brothers attempted to get a new Superman film back on track. A new project titled Superman Flyby was submitted by J.J. Abrams. While he also championed to direct, Brett Ratner was chosen instead. Abrams' rebooted origin had Kal-El sent to Earth following Jor-El's prison sentencing from his evil brother Kata Zor. Fascinatingly, in this version, Krypton is never destroyed. Superman's foes in the film would have been Lex Luthor, secretly a Kryptonian sleeper agent played by Robert Downey Jr., as well as Kata-Zor's son, Ty Zor, portrayed by Joel Edgerton. The cast was rounded out by Scarlett Johansson as Lois Lane, Shia LaBeouf as Jimmy Olsen, Christopher Walken as Perry White, and Anthony Hopkins as Jor-El. Ratner then departed the film, with McGee being hired to serve as his replacement. The role of Superman would ultimately not be cast, as the film would end up being cancelled before any casting was completed. Notable actors who screen tested included Josh Hartnett, Brandon Routh, Brendan Fraser, Henry Cavill, and Jared Padalecki. The final suit for the film was really cool too, but after Flyby fell apart, Warner Brothers were sold on X-Men director Bryan Singer's pitch. His pitch would go back to the basics of the series, making a direct sequel to Superman 2. Christopher Reeve, hired as a project consultant, insisted Tom Welling play the role, impressed with his performance in Smallville. Sadly, Reeve would pass away before the role was finally cast. After previously auditioning and screen testing for not only Flyby but Smallville 2, Brandon Routh would finally win the part of Superman. Reeve's widow, Dana Reeve, even commented, noting the strong resemblance between Routh and her late husband. Launching a massive marketing campaign, it was impossible not to see Superman anywhere for all of 2006. Featuring a huge merchandise drop, the excitement for Superman Returns was in full effect. Although the film had a massive opening weekend, grossing $52 million domestically, the film sadly couldn't hold on to that momentum, as it was quickly dethroned by Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest and The Devil Wears Prada the following week. Ending its theatrical run with an earnest $391 million, Warner Brothers were not satisfied with the return, mostly due to the project's $223 million price tag. And let's be honest, it did not need to be that expensive. Although DC was a big deal in the 2000s thanks to animated projects like Justice League, DC films just didn't have a huge mark on audiences the same way, most likely due to feeling tainted by Batman and Robin.
You look like some kind of fruity magician.
Following Batman and Robin's release, every subsequent DC film underperformed until The Dark Knight. Steel, Catwoman, Batman Begins, Constantine, and Superman Returns all failed to make even $400 million. Of course, The Dark Knight would change all of that. While there had been plans at one point for a Superman Returns sequel, Warner Brothers was intent on completely starting over with a reboot. Finally creating a shared DC universe in live action, the legendary George Miller was hired to steer the ship. Titled Justice League Mortal, Miller's take on the iconic DC heroes would have seen them face off against a villainous duo, Maxwell Lord and Talia al Ghul, played by Jay Baruchel and Teresa Palmer. Casting was completed by October 2007, with a massive ensemble featuring DJ Catrona as Superman, Armie Hammer as Batman, Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, Santiago Cabrera as Aquaman, Adam Brody as The Flash, Common as Green Lantern, and Hugh Keys-Byrne as Martian Manhunter. Additional cast members included Zoe Kazan and Anton Yelchin as Iris and Wally West. Weta Workshop completed all the costumes, with filming set to begin in July 2008. Much of the production was kept under wraps, so very few pictures have come out of it. That being said, Megan Gale did a photo shoot following her costume fitting. The costume is amazing. The entire league was pretty well cast, but my only reservation is Armie Hammer, since he would have only been 21 years old at the time. However, 21-year-old Armie Hammer looks like that, so I take it back. The film would have been awesome, and seeing George Miller's take on the DC Universe would have been the coolest thing ever. There's so much to cover for Justice League Mortal, so honestly, I think I'll save it all for its own video. When things went sideways for Justice League Mortal, a new opportunity to create a Superman film opened. Mark Millar and Matthew Vaughn wrote a pitch together with the intention of Vaughn directing. They planned a grand epic trilogy they equated to Lord of the Rings in terms of its feel and scale. The plan would have been to shoot the trilogy all together to release one film a year. It would have chronicled Kal-el's entire life, beginning as a child on Krypton, where he would have witnessed his father's attempts at saving the planet, to him as Superman, and ending with him losing his powers due to the sun going supernova. While the scale would be epic, Vaughn later stated the tone would be consistent with that of the Reeve films. Charlie Cox was set to play Superman, with Zod, Brainiac, and Lex Luthor appearing as the main villain of each respective film. While the entire premise was super cool and seemed to advance the character into a more modern tone with bigger stakes, sadly Warner Brothers felt a reboot was too big of a risk, so they pivoted back to developing a Superman Returns sequel instead.
What?
Production was stalled as Warner Brothers accommodated Bryan Singer's schedule so he could complete Valkyrie.
Hey, yo!
Budgeted at $175 million, which is a $50 million decrease from the previous film, Warner Brothers were intent on having a home run with the new Superman film. While Superman Returns was a critical success, some were unhappy with the lack of action and a bigger focus on the intimate relationships of the characters. For the sequel, an effort was made to make it as action-packed as possible, pitting Superman against both Brainiac and Bizarro. Set for a 2010 release, things seemed pretty promising when suddenly Bryan Singer left to instead direct Jack the Giant Slayer. The sequel was inevitably cancelled, and Superman's future on the big screen was now in question once again. During story discussions for The Dark Knight Rises, Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer began coming up with ideas for a modernization of Superman, similar in tone to the Dark Knight trilogy. Confident in the idea, Nolan and Goyer pitched it. Immediately on board, Warner Brothers hoped Nolan would direct as well. Although Nolan largely contributed to the script and remained on board as a very hands-on producer, he ultimately wanted a break from the superhero genre. A multitude of filmmakers became in talks with the studio, with prestigious picks such as Robert Zemeckis, Guillermo del Toro, Tony Scott, and Darren Aronofsky. Other directors in talks included Ben Affleck, who of course went on to star as Batman, Matt Reeves, Jonathan Liebesman, and Duncan Jones. In the end, Zack Snyder was chosen after a lengthy process. With films like 300 and Watchmen in his catalog, he was undoubtedly a great pick. Known for his strong visual style, Snyder intended to create a fresh take on Superman. Working closely with Jay Oliva, the two storyboarded the entire film together, being heavily influenced by anime shows like Dragon Ball Z and Birdie the Mighty. While many would disagree, a lot of people felt Superman's characterization was boring and needed to be reinvented. One of the biggest critics of Superman was surprisingly Kevin Conroy.
And Superman is, square-jawed, farm-fed. He's just so boring. He's got no issues. He can see through walls. He can jump over planes. He can fly. I mean, well, what's the challenge for him,
What the hell are you talking about?
While his opinion was viewed as very controversial, I do agree with him in a way. Superman has never had much struggle. The biggest is probably his difficulty in maintaining two identities and the struggles that come from trying to maintain his moral code. While this is interesting, it can get old fast, because he is pretty overpowered, with kryptonite being his only real weakness. Snyder, Goyer, and Nolan reinvigorated my passion for Superman. They made him feel more human than ever. His difficulty in understanding his identity really makes Clark feel human. Towards the end of the film, there's even a really touching scene where he visits a church to talk to a priest, unsure if facing Zod is the best outcome.
Even if I surrender, there's no guarantee he'll keep his word, but if there's a chance, I can save Earth by turning myself in. Shouldn't I take it?
What does your gut tell you?
Zod can't be trusted. The problem is, I'm not sure if the people of Earth can be either.
Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith first. The trust part comes later.
In other words, if Superman can be the bigger person and treat us as trustworthy, then maybe we as humans will be inspired to live up to his expectations. Superman has always been a character who is so sure of himself, so to see a film where Clark is genuinely vulnerable and unsure of his place in the world is just extremely gratifying to see. While seeing a superhuman character with the coolest abilities ever is a fun escape, having a hero with relatable struggles is just as cathartic. Upon release, Man of Steel was a pretty divisive film. Having Superman kill Zod seemed to go against the character, but all in all, Man of Steel was never supposed to be a one-to-one adaptation of the character. In the same way Batman Begins completely reinvented Batman in a grounded real-world setting, Man of Steel did that for Superman, gave the caped icon a very layered arc. Interestingly, Man of Steel was very strongly considered to exist in the same continuity as the Dark Knight trilogy. Had this come to fruition, Christian Bale would have been the one to face off against Superman in the film's sequel. As Batman vs. Superman released, many Superman fans were left frustrated once again by the moody take on the character. Clark's inner turmoil and struggle to deal with a world that either reveres or hates him is extremely compelling. Some commended his arc, but others were not happy.
This will not stand!
Although Batman and Superman face off in what's honestly one of the coolest fights ever.
Well, here I am. All too easy.
They ultimately team up to take on Doomsday. During the film's climax, Superman chooses to sacrifice himself to destroy the grotesque creature. Many were perplexed by the decision to kill him after just 2 appearances. However, this was all part of Zack's master plan. Even though the movie generated a lot of controversy, many were still hyped for Justice League. Unfortunately, studio meddling ruined the movie. Once Joss Whedon was brought on board to reshape the film, Zack's creative footprint was completely wiped. The result was a muddled mess with some of the worst CGI. Though the film had Superman portrayed in a more traditional way, many were left distracted by the infamous CGI mustache removal and the extremely cringeworthy humor.
Tell me. Do you bleed? Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding. I want to die.
In an attempt to fix the movie, it ended up way worse. As the real Snyder Cut began streaming, the world finally understood Snyder's reasoning for killing Superman off in the previous film. Upon seeing the whole film and the resolution of his arc, the world rejoiced as they finally saw Henry Cavill's Superman the way they always wanted. Snyder always intended Superman to be the hopeful beacon of light everyone knows, but he wanted him to have an arc to getting there. Nobody starts off like that, so it was honestly fascinating to watch the character grow in a classic hero's journey. Sadly, not everyone liked this approach, as many either love it or hate it. As talks of another Superman film began again, there was a huge sandbox to play in with endless possibilities of potential. With a lot of problems within WB, The Rock worked hard in getting Cavill back into the fold.
Just like I fought hard for Black Adam for 15 years, Danny has been fighting for 6 years, Hiram has been fighting for 6 years, 15 years, we've all been fighting for this moment, so I will say this. Welcome home.
Like everything, nothing lasts forever. As everyone finally banded together in appreciating Henry Cavill's grand return in Black Adam, the decision was made to completely reboot the DC film franchise into a new DC universe run by James Gunn, despite talks of a Man of Steel sequel already underway. With his track record, there's no better director than Gunn to spearhead a fresh take on the world of DC. Just days after announcing his return to the role in an Instagram post,
I wanted to make it official that I am back as Superman. And the image you see on this post and what you saw in Black Adam is just a very small taste of things to come.
Come on, the suspense is killing me.
Cavill unfortunately confirmed he was out once again. This broke the hearts of many. While Gunn's wish to completely reboot the DCEU into a new franchise is understandable given all the baggage and inconsistencies it had, some were outraged and immediately turned on the filmmaker, while others were in complete agreement with him. Upon taking control of the newly christened DC Studios, Gunn made changes to The Flash, cutting a scene featuring Henry Cavill, as well as a scene with Ben Affleck and Aquaman 2, as to not lead on fans that their characters would continue on in future projects. After a 10-year run of a lot of hits and misses, the DCEU ended on a whimper with Aquaman and the Last Kingdom, which released to very mixed reviews and was sadly quite forgettable, and it didn't really have the greatest box office return too. First announced as Superman Legacy, James Gunn promises a fresh take on the character, bringing him back to a more hopeful Donner-esque portrayal. Leading up to the announcement of the casting for Superman, many fans and online had already fan-cast David Corenswet in the role. Although I've only seen him in Pearl and Twisters, I think he's already shown to be a very versatile talent, able to work with anything. Though the film has a fantastic supporting cast, it'll sadly have an uphill battle to gain a wide audience, as there aren't that many well-known actors in the film. The Dark Knight trilogy and Man of Steel always had big players in the cast to appease moviegoers that aren't necessarily comic fans. Now dubbed just Superman, this project has to be a home run for Warner Brothers, or DC risks completely falling apart. The recent string of failures are really relying on Superman to be a huge success. With James Gunn at the helm and with all the right ingredients baked in, I have a lot of faith that this will usher in a new generation of great DC stories.
Why me? There must be a reason why I was sent to this planet.
You won't find the answers by looking to the stars. It's a journey you'll have to take by looking inside yourself. You must write your own destiny, Kal-el.